There's a boy at a window in Berlin, a telescope pressed to his eye. He's 12 years old, too small for the sill, but stubborn enough to stand there anyway. His mother gave him that telescope as a gift on the day of his church confirmation. In that family, religion came with ceremony. Curiosity, if you ask the right questions, came with reward. His name is Wernher Magnus Maximilian Freiherr von Braun, a young baron born into privilege, but standing at the edge of a collapsing world. Berlin in the 1920s is a city of extremes. Trams rattle down crowded streets, posters advertise cabaret shows and avant-garde plays. Shopkeepers scribble new prices in chalk because inflation makes yesterday's numbers worthless. The Weimar Republic is brilliant, unstable, and broke. In drawing rooms, aristocrats raise their glasses to a past that isn't coming back. In student bars, young men argue over futures that haven't arrived yet. And on a quiet street, a boy with a telescope is deciding which world he belongs to. Von Braun is already a contradiction. His shoes are polished, but his knees are scuffed. He can play Beethoven by memory, yet he spends his afternoons strapping firecrackers to toy wagons. One day, he launches a homemade rocket cart down the street, Leipziger Strasse. It hisses, sparks, and crashes into a hedge. A policeman drags him home by the collar. The explanation spills out, "I just wanted to see how fast it could go." It won't be the last time his curiosity outruns his judgment. And that's the thread to remember. A boy who sees the stars, and a man who will one day learn what they cost. Then comes the turning point. He finds a book, The Rocket into Interplanetary Space, written by Hermann Oberth. Inside, rockets aren't toys or fireworks. They're machines. You can throttle them, steer them, aim them at planets. For the first time, the dream feels real. The boy who struggled with math suddenly attacks equations like his life depends on it. Exponents, integrals, drag coefficients. If this is the price of spaceflight, he'll pay. He stops coasting. He starts calculating. By the time he enrolls at the Berlin Institute of Technology, he's found his first true community, the German Society for Space Travel. The meetings are nothing glamorous. A back room that smells of beer and solder. Young men bent over blueprints and chalkboards arguing about nozzles and fuel mixtures. They scavenge scrap metal, trade valves, beg for tubing. Their test site is nothing more than an old artillery range on the edge of the city. The press nicknames it the Rocket Rumble, and most of their rockets do just that. They rumble, sputter, and explode. But once in a while, for 3 clean seconds, a flame burns steady. And in those moments, Wernher von Braun sees the future. Meanwhile, outside the test range, Germany is unraveling. Hyperinflation guts the middle class. Political movements turn into mobs. The Nazis, once dismissed as clowns, are filling halls with cheers. In Werner circles, most look down on politics. He looks past it. He's too focused on fuel injectors and nozzle stress. And then, a car pulls up at the rocket field. Inside is Captain Walter Dornberger, an artillery officer with sharp eyes and sharper ambitions. Dornberger has noticed something. The Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from building bombers, battleships, and tanks, but it said nothing about rockets. Rockets can fly above those rules, and this young baron with his scrap metal tests might just be the key. Dornberger makes an offer. Come to Kummersdorf, the Army's proving ground, and build rockets, with real funding, real materials, and official cover. Keep it secret. Write a dissertation along the way. The military will protect the work. For a 20-year-old student who's been begging for parts, it's irresistible. Von Braun accepts. And with that decision, the course is set. The dream of space will no longer belong only to dreamers. From this point forward, it belongs to armies. The boy with the telescope has taken his first bargain. The dream is alive, but so is the price. The old ammunition dump on the edge of Berlin is now the Society for Space Travel's rocket field. Wernher von Braun spends his nights here with Willy Ley and a handful of true believers, filing injectors by hand and testing small liquid fuel engines that work just long enough to keep the dream alive. In 1932, 3 Army officers arrive to watch. Their names are Colonel Karl Becker, Major Richard von Horstig, and Captain Walter Dornberger. What they see is crude, but the idea is not. The Treaty of Versailles bans big guns, tanks, and a modern air force. It says nothing about rockets. If a rocket can throw a warhead far enough, Germany can rearm without violating a single word on paper. They offer von Braun a way out of the shed and into a real lab. Move to the Army's proving ground at Kummersdorf. Use proper shops and instrumentation. Finish a PhD under Becker while doing Army research. The Society dreams of space. The Army wants range and accuracy. Von Braun accepts, believing he can serve both masters at once. Kummersdorf turns experiments into engineering. The first Army designs, A1 and A2, teach the basics by failure. Put the engine in the base, not the nose, where the vehicle tumbles. Place the gyroscope near the center of mass, or guidance will fight the airframe. Fix the propellant feed, or the chamber burns through. Most tests end in smoke. A few succeed. In December 1934, 2 small vehicles, Max and Moritz, lift cleanly and splash into the Baltic. The flights are short, but the physics holds. While the rockets inch forward, Germany moves faster. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes chancellor. Within months, opposition parties are dismantled. Jewish professors and students are pushed out. The officer corps now swears loyalty to Hitler personally. Money floods into rearmament, publicly where possible and quietly where necessary. Rockets are the quiet part. The services compete for control. The Army pushes long-range missiles, the Luftwaffe invests in jets and rocket-assisted takeoff, the SS tries to plant a flag wherever it can. Those rivalries will shape the rocket program as much as any technical milestone. Kummersdorf is too small and too close to Berlin for the larger vehicles the team now draws on paper. The Army selects a remote site on the Baltic coast, Peenemünde. It has rail access, a wide approach over water, and room for big test stands. Construction begins in 1936. In 1937, at 25, von Braun becomes technical director of the new research center. There is a condition attached to the promotion. To hold the post, he must join the Nazi Party. On May 1, 1937, he signs the card. Later, he will describe this as apolitical. In a state that demands oaths to work, neutrality is not an option. Peenemünde scales everything. Separate divisions handle engines, structures, guidance, and flight test. Walter Thiel drives the propulsion work forward. The Army sets the target, the aggregate 4, the A4, a ballistic missile meant to outrange any artillery on Earth. The step before space looks exactly like a weapon. The risks are real. Injectors must atomize alcohol and liquid oxygen evenly or the chamber burns through. Turbopumps must spin at extreme speed without tearing themselves apart. Guidance must hold a slender supersonic body steady through the roughest part of flight. The A3 tests in 1937 expose how fragile the stack still is. Those lessons roll into the A4 design. It is a system of systems. A fault in any one of them ends the flight in fire. In the spring of 1939, Hitler visits an Army proving ground to see what his money has bought. He is impatient. He wants simple answers. How far and how soon? The engineers have data and caveats. Von Braun and Dornberger leave unsure if they have earned true priority. War settles that question. When Germany invades Poland in September 1939, the program gains urgency, but not a blank check. Steel, fuel, and skilled labor are scarce. In 1940, the SS arrives with an invitation. Heinrich Himmler wants von Braun in the SS. An officer on paper,
a visible endorsement from the most powerful police force in the Reich. Von Braun knows what refusal can mean. He consults Dornberger and accepts the commission. He will later call the uniform ceremonial. Uniforms, however, come with strings.
On October 3, 1942, Flight 3 lifts off from Peenemünde. The engine lights cleanly and the rocket climbs straight. Telemetry holds and the motor runs a full burn. The vehicle flies the planned range, the first time a human-made machine reaches near space speeds, even though the altitude falls short. In the blockhouse, engineers cheer. They have built a machine that burns alcohol and liquid oxygen and turns chemistry into velocity with striking efficiency. Guidance holds a slim cylinder steady through supersonic flight. The structure bears loads no earthly vehicle has faced. In engineering terms, it is a masterpiece. In Berlin, officials see something else, a weapon that works. The propaganda ministry gives the A4 a new name, V2, Vergeltungswaffe 2, the second vengeance weapon. Hitler grants top priority status. That brings materials, protection, and deadlines. Production planning starts before the design is fully tamed. Power shifts around Peenemünde. The army runs development. Albert Speer's armaments ministry sketches factories and quotas. The SS pushes for access. Dornberger fights to keep SS men off the lab floor and mostly succeeds for a time. Generals, ministers, and party officials now tour the island weekly. Every improvement draws more attention. Every failure has more spectators. Inside the lab, von Braun still talks about multi-stage flight, satellites, and what it would take to reach orbit. On his maps, arrows point up. On the maps in Berlin, trajectories end in London. Both realities exist at once. He is building the machine he dreamed of. He is delivering it to men who will not point it skyward. By early 1943, trains arrive with steel and precision parts. Army officers and armaments planners meet to translate drawings into output. The first targets are wildly optimistic. Thousands of rockets per month. Speer promises factories and labor. How those promises will be kept will matter more than anyone at Peenemünde wants to admit. Then, the bombers find them. August 17, 1943. Just after midnight, the Royal Air Force heads for the Baltic coast. The target is Peenemünde, the German Army's rocket base. Searchlights sweep the sky. Flak climbs to meet the bombers. By dawn, the damage is plain. Test stands cratered, dormitory smashed, propulsion expert Walter Thiel dead. Schedules that once lived on boards now live in a fog of uncertainty. The message is blunt. Build a wonder weapon on an island and someone will find the island. Keep building, and the factories must move where bombs cannot reach. The decision comes quickly at the top. Armaments Minister Albert Speer assumes control of V2 production and turns to SS General Hans Kammler, an engineer who commands the Reich's forced labor system. Kammler proposes an answer that protects machines at the expense of people. Put the production line inside a mountain. No roof to bomb, no windows to shatter, tunnels, rails, doors.
The site is the Konstein, a chalk hill near Nordhausen in the Harz Mountains. Old mine galleries are enlarged and braced. The new complex is named Mittelwerk, Central Works. To supply workers, the SS opens a new concentration camp next door. It begins as Dora, later Mittelbau Dora. Prisoners from Buchenwald and other camps arrive by boxcar. Many are marched straight into the tunnels. At the start, there are no barracks. Men sleep where they work. Air is thick with dust and exhaust. Shifts run 12 to 14 hours. Rations barely sustain life. Disease spreads. Punishment is immediate and public. Over the next 18 months, thousands will die here building a rocket. From this point, the V2 program splits. Peenemünde remains the brain, designing engines, guidance, and structures, and flying tests. Mittelwerk becomes the arm, assembling finished missiles around the clock. Drawings and specifications travel south by courier.
Subcontractors across Germany build tanks, fins, pumps, and valves. Trains unload parts at one end of the mountain, finished rockets leave at the other, stenciled with serial numbers and destinations. A day in Dora. Wake well before dawn. Hours of roll call in freezing air. March into the galleries. Overhead cranes move propellant tanks into position. Prisoners rivet skins, mount engines, and thread wiring looms, bundled cabling under electric lamps. A man who slows the line is replaced. A man who resists is beaten. At night, bodies leave on the same rails that bring in parts. This factory makes the rocket possible. Wernher von Braun remains technical director at Peenemünde. He does not run the camp. He does not work in ignorance either. He travels to Mittelwerk several times in 1943 and 1944 to solve production problems. Later, he will call the conditions repulsive and say he did not see deaths. Prisoners and other witnesses recall engineers on catwalks, managers observing punishments, and a constant drive to increase output. His visits are recorded. His denials are recorded. What is not in dispute is the system, an SS-run plant using captive labor to build an army weapon. The engineering stakes are high. Rushing the A4 makes it fragile. Combustion can go unstable and burn through a chamber in seconds. If the turbopump cavitates or vapor locks, the engine will shut down. If guidance drifts, the airframe will tumble and break apart. Investigators trace failures to bad welds, contaminated fuel lines, and misrigged fins. Quality inspections multiply. So does fear. Sabotage appears. Bent safety fuses, swapped parts, sand and bearings. Small acts by prisoners who know the risk. The SS answers with more searches and public hangings in the tunnels. Engineers add test steps to catch defects. The line keeps moving. There is also a search for talent inside the camp network. Von Braun learns that French physicist Charles Saudron is held at Buchenwald. He proposes a small laboratory near the factory and requests technical prisoners be transferred to work there. Saudron refuses to cooperate, and the idea collapses. Even so, skilled prisoners are moved to stations where expertise matters. The program is hunting for minds as well as hands, even here. Back on the Baltic, Peenemünde still launches test shots, but the island no longer feels safe. After the RAF raid, Allied reconnaissance keeps returning. Production planning shifts permanently to the Harz. The SS footprint grows around the program. The Army remains responsible for development. The SS grips the plant and the people who feed it. March 1944 brings a different pressure. The Gestapo arrests Wernher von Braun for defeatist talk and talk of spaceships during wartime, reported from a private conversation by an informant. Rivals see a chance to gain leverage over the rocket program. Von Braun spends roughly 10 days in a cell while superiors scramble. General Walter Dornberger and Albert Speer go to Hitler with this simple argument: without von Braun, the A4 will fail. The word that unlocks the door is indispensable. He is released on condition that he keep his focus on the weapon and his opinions to himself. Afterward, he is careful. At official functions, he appears in the black SS officer uniform he once called ceremonial. He stops speaking publicly about space and leans into what the regime demands: numbers. By mid-1944, Mittelwerk runs continuously. 2 long parallel galleries hold the assembly lines. Side tunnels store components and house machine shops. Trains bring fins, tanks, and engines. Finished V2s roll out with acceptance tags, past inspection. Static firings qualify batches at remote sites. Mobile launch units train in occupied territory. Soon, the weapon is in use. London and Antwerp are hit. The V2 travels faster than sound. People hear the explosion before they hear the rocket. It is terrifying. It is not decisive. Inside design offices, engineers still talk quietly about staging, satellites, and orbits. On Sundays, some sketch ideas that point upward. In the tunnels, prisoners count calories and days. Both realities exist at the same time.
Only one of them sets deadlines. The RAF raid does more than wreck buildings. It changes the program's structure. An open research base becomes a closed industrial camp. The choice that protects a weapon creates the deadliest rocket factory in history. More people will die building the V2 than the V2 will kill in flight. Responsibility is specific. Von Braun did not design the camp, command guards, or sign execution orders. He did continue as the technical face of a program whose production ran on captivity. He visited. He saw enough to be disturbed. He kept going. He later said the dream of space required him to stay at the center of the work. The dream is real. So is the cost. Meanwhile, the war turns. The Allies land in Normandy. The Red Army pushes from the east. Under pressure, output rises, but reliability suffers. Mid-air breakups, short-range impacts, guidance errors. Investigators write fix lists back to middle work. The SS writes threats. The loop tightens. The weapon works often enough to frighten, never often enough to change the outcome. By early 1945, the Harz is one of the last places in Germany still producing to plan. As front lines close in, Kammler orders evacuations and death marches. Engineers burn documents. Others hide drawings and files in a nearby mine. The leadership that forced the line underground now prepares to move the rocket team out. Within weeks, a convoy rolls into the Alps, an arm in a cast, a white flag raised, and a new bargain begins. Operation Paperclip.
Germany is collapsing. The rocket program breaks into pieces and moves south. Families in trucks, engineers with toolboxes, crates of parts, and stacks of drawings. Some records are burned. The most valuable ones are hidden. Near Nordhausen, engineers pack injector diagrams, turbopump drawings, guidance notes, and test logs into crates and push them deep into a mine. In that darkness sits a year of hard-won lessons: how to make a V2 light, run, and fly. Whoever finds those papers will inherit the program. They leave markers they can recognize after the front passes. It is not just equipment they're preserving, it is a roadmap. Mistakes, fixes, tolerances that can't be guessed in a lab from scratch. That is the real cargo of this retreat. On the way to the Alps, Wernher von Braun is injured in a car accident. His arm goes into a cast. The team keeps moving toward American lines. They are choosing who arrests them. The Red Army has its own lists. The Americans do too. The decision is practical. The West promises a future. The East looks like a trial. On May 2nd, 1945, near the Austrian border, the core of the rocket group surrenders to a US patrol. They come with a proposal. Take us, and we'll show you where the documents are, what they mean, and how to make a V2 work in your desert. The Americans take the deal. Trucks roll toward the mine. By summer, Allied technical teams are running structured interrogations at sites codenamed Dustbin and elsewhere. The questions are focused. How did you stop combustion instability? Which injector pattern held? What solved turbopump cavitation? Who designed the guidance gyros? Von Braun answers like an engineer. He maps the failure tree and the fix. He also names colleagues the Americans will want to interview next. At the same time, intelligence officers keep a second checklist: usefulness versus past. Party cards, SS ranks, and wartime duties are logged and weighed against what each man can teach. The calculus tilts as the next war, the Cold War, comes into view. The first custody plan is called Overcast. It is meant to be temporary. Bring the specialists over, learn what they know, and send them back. Within months, Overcast becomes Paperclip. The paperclip on a personnel file means move this person to the United States. Agencies argue over every name. Some men are blocked. Others are cleared with conditions.
As the Soviets load rail cars with equipment and engineers from Germany's east, Washington makes a decision: move not only the hardware, but the people. There is an ethical record here. Some affiliations are minimized in summaries. Some histories are rewritten as necessary to continue technical work. Security reviews narrow their focus to present value for U.S. defense. It is not an accident, it is policy. The von Braun group arrives in Texas under Army control and relocates to White Sands, New Mexico, the kind of open range they never had in Europe. They call themselves prisoners of peace. In Army shops, they open crates stamped V2, sort German tanks and nozzles on American benches, relabel valves in English, and bolt together rockets to U.S. safety standards. The first assemblies are rough. Then the rhythm returns. Leak checks, electrical continuity, gyro spin-ups, fuel and LOX procedures, countdown. Launch days look familiar and completely different. Familiar, the checks, the plume, the sound. Different, the payloads. Instead of warheads, the nose carries instruments, cameras, cosmic ray detectors, biology capsules. The goal is now altitude, not impact. Rockets from White Sands cross the 100-kilometer line. The Army learns by doing: how to prime a turbopump in the cold, how to avoid hard starts, how to tune guidance so the fins don't overcorrect. An American range culture is born. Safety corridors, radar tracking, telemetry rooms, post-shot briefings. In those briefings, U.S. officers ask why the Germans made certain choices. Why that alloy? Why that injector pattern? Why fins and not gimbals? Von Braun explains the trade-offs. He also points forward. If you want more range, you stage. If you want control without fins, you move the engine. If you want orbit, you need a family of vehicles, not a single missile. The answers are practical and pointed. He is already selling the next step. Outside the fence, the story is quiet. To the public, these are just specialists assisting U.S. projects. Their pasts are off limits. Photographs are screened. Articles use bland labels. Inside the fence, the Americans measure a technology gap, closing in real time. Range officers, guidance engineers, and propulsion crews are learning on the job. The German team is learning a new country. Operation Paperclip has two faces. To soldiers on the range, it is a fast way to turn captured parts into working flights, and turn flights into training. To Washington, it is a strategic hedge against the Soviets, and a moral compromise wrapped in a security file. To von Braun, it is a bridge. The machine he built for a dictatorship is the machine he will use to make a case for space in a democracy. There is a question at the center of this act. Can the same man who delivered a weapon to Hitler persuade America to fund a trip to the moon? The answer will not be decided in a lab. It will be decided in magazines, on television, and at a new space agency that does not exist yet. Paperclip is not the end of the bargain. It is the laundering of it. Through interviews, visas, base housing, and desert launches, until the work looks like it has always belonged here. The war is over, the Cold War is underway, and the dream that began in a Berlin window now has an American address.
In the desert, the V2s teach the US how to run a rocket range, but Wernher von Braun sees something else he has never had: a public. If America is going to fund real spaceflight, people have to want it. He decides to become its salesman. In 1952, Collier's magazine runs a bold series, Man Will Conquer Space Soon. Von Braun writes with Willy Ley and others. The pictures do the heavy lifting: crisp paintings of a wheel-shaped space station, reusable winged shuttles, and an expedition stepping onto the moon. The articles are plain and practical. Here's how much fuel. Here's why a rotating station gives you artificial gravity. Here's how you stage a rocket so it actually reaches orbit. For many Americans, this is the first time space travel looks like engineering, not science fiction. The series creates a template. If you can imagine the path in clear steps, you can fund each step.
Von Braun is building a ladder in public. 3 years later, he takes the plan to television. Disney's Tomorrowland episodes Man in Space, Man on the Moon, and later Mars and Beyond bring him into living rooms. On camera, he isn't the stern military engineer from Peenemünde. He's a calm explainer with a slide rule, a German accent, and a friendly smile. He points to cutaways, traces trajectories with chalk, and says, in effect, "We can do this." The shows reach millions. Teachers play them in classrooms, editors and generals take notice. There's an image forming, the gentleman engineer, tidy and visionary who talks about satellites and stations instead of the war that built his reputation. What gets left out is part of the story too. The public sees the dream, not the cost that came before it. Behind the camera work, the Army work continues. In 1950, the von Braun Group moves from Texas to Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. They turn a wartime post into a research town, test stands, grafting rooms, machine shops. The Redstone missile becomes their backbone. It is sturdy, controllable, and reliable. They stretch it into Jupiter-C, a high-speed test vehicle meant to study re-entry heating. Jupiter-C looks suspiciously like the first stage of an orbital launcher. That is not an accident. Inside the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, von Braun's team proposes a satellite plan called Orbiter. The idea is simple. Add upper stages to Jupiter-C and toss a small payload into space. The White House picks a different project for Prestige, Vanguard, a Navy-led civilian effort, partly to keep the first American satellites separate from the military. Von Braun is told to stand down. He publicly salutes the decision. Privately, he keeps the parts list ready. Then, October 57, Sputnik. A beeping sphere from the Soviet Union crosses the night sky and the front page. American pride takes a direct hit. Phones ring in Huntsville. The race is no longer a metaphor. It is scheduled. The Army gives von Braun the green light it had withheld. In a rush measured in weeks, the team mates a 4-stage Juno 1 launcher, Jupiter-C with clustered upper stages, to a compact scientific satellite built by James Van Allen's group. The goal is not just to get up, it is to bring back data. January 31st, 1958. The pad at Cape Canaveral is ready. The Juno 1 rises, stages cleanly, and vanishes into dark. A few tense minutes later, the range receives confirmation: orbit. The satellite is named Explorer 1. Its Geiger counter readings will help reveal the radiation belts that circle Earth. On a night when America needed a win, the desert engineer delivers one. The public outcome is simple: America is in space. Inside the Pentagon and the new science agencies, the outcome is more complicated. The Army team just did what the Navy project could not. Washington's answer is to reorganize the field. In 1958, the United States creates NASA to run a civilian space program. Over the next 2 years, NASA pulls rocket development away from the Army and consolidates it under a new center in Huntsville. In 1960, this becomes the Marshall Space Flight Center. Wernher von Braun is named its first director. The job changes with the title. He is no longer only a chief engineer, he is an empire builder. Budgets, hiring, test schedules, meetings with Washington, and a long list of promises to keep. He is also still the explainer. He walks visitors past scale models, he keeps publishing articles, and he pitches a path that flows from missiles to orbit to the moon. As his profile rises, coverage treats him as the face of a new age. Articles praise his clarity and charm. They don't spend many lines on the SS Commission or the Dora tunnels. The past is not erased, but it is quiet. That contrast, what is highlighted and what is not, helps build the Mr. Space brand that will follow him through the 1960s. Now the dream meets a new kind of pressure: people on top. NASA's first human program, Project Mercury, needs a small, reliable booster. The Redstone is picked for the first suborbital flights. In January 1961, the Mercury Redstone 2 mission with a chimp ham flies higher and farther than planned because of a thrust and cutoff timing issue. The capsule splashes down safely, but the overperformance raises a question. Do you launch a human next, or do you test again? Von Braun's team can make the case either way. They want to fly. NASA management wants one more unmanned check. The compromise is a new test, MRBD, to prove the fixes. It works. Alan Shepard flies a clean suborbital hop on May 5, 1961. The United States gets its first astronaut. The tape of Shepard's convoys is a small miracle. This missile is now a spaceship, and the country believes it. The Causian versus race debate becomes part of von Braun's leadership style. He frames it as engineering discipline, not delay. You win public trust by not killing your pilots. In this act, you see him balancing speed with margin in a way he did not always have the power to do in Germany. The public campaign doesn't stop with TV. He visits schools, speaks at planetariums, and writes for popular magazines. He sketches Mars trajectories on napkins for reporters. He's convincing because he sounds like a foreman and a dreamer at once. Cost, schedules, and why it matters that children see pictures of places we have never been. By the end of the 1950s, the pieces are in place for something much bigger. The Army missiles taught control, the desert flights caught operations, Disney and Collier's taught the audience. Explorer 1 proved a point in orbit. Marshall now has the mandate to scale up. The question becomes, scale to what? He is about to get the giant canvas he's been pitching for a decade, a family of heavy launch vehicles capable of sending people beyond Earth orbit. And the country is about to set a deadline that will define the rest of his career. The dream now wears a suit and a US badge. The rockets point upward again. In the next act, the drawings on the wall become the Saturns on the pad. A president says, "the moon," and Wernher von Braun tries to turn a nation's promise into a working machine.
By 1960, Wernher von Braun is leading NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, so Marshall takes ownership of the big launch vehicles. The agency has a mandate, but not yet a fixed destination or deadline, which means the design work starts before the goal is fully defined. In May 1961, Yuri Gagarin has orbited and Alan Shepard has flown a short hop. So President Kennedy sets a clear target: land a man on the moon and bring him home before the decade ends. Because the goal is public and the clock is running, budgets climb, schedules compress, and every risk gets a name, an owner, and a plan. That choice doesn't just set direction, it fixes the pace for the rest of the 1960s. Marshall's answer is the Saturn family, with the Saturn V at the top. It's a 3-stage rocket. The first stage uses 5 F1 engines, and a single F1 makes more thrust than all 3 Space Shuttle main engines combined. That power brings a delicate problem called combustion instability, pressure waves in the flame that can grow into violent oscillations and shake an engine to pieces. Engineers respond the reliable way. They try thousands of injector patterns and add metal baffles inside the chamber to break up the pulses. And when a single F1 lights clean and runs smooth for a full test, they bolt on 4 more and ask the same question at scale: will 5 still behave? Von Braun's fingerprints are everywhere: big safety margins where structure needs them, backups on critical systems, and strict configuration control. In practice, that means change a bolt, change the drawing, and make sure the updated drawing rides with the hardware so the next technician knows exactly what they're touching. Testing climbs the ladder on purpose. First the component, then the stage, and only then the full stack on the stand, so a small failure stays small. Headquarters pushes for speed. George Miller's all-up testing says light every stage together and learn fast. It feels risky because a single failure can cost more in one shot, but it also saves years because you see full system behavior right away. Von Braun is cautious, then he adapts. There's also a mission architecture choice to settle. Early ideas favor direct ascent on one giant rocket or assembly in Earth orbit. Engineer John Hobolt argues for Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, LOR. Send a mothership and a small lander, dock around the moon, and keep the landing mass low. Von Braun's team works the numbers and switches to LOR because it fits Saturn V's lift and keeps the program inside time and budget. Florida scales up to match Huntsville's hardware. Kurt Debus, another Peenemünde veteran, leads the Launch Operations Center, later Kennedy Space Center. The vehicle assembly building rises, the crawler moves stacks to the pad, and procedures standardize thousands of steps so a tested vehicle reaches the pad in a repeatable way and lights on time. Then a tragedy forces a reset. On January 27, 1967, a ground test for Apollo 1 ends in a cabin fire.
Gus Grissom and Ed White and Roger Chaffee are lost. Investigations traced linked causes: flammable materials, an oxygen-rich test atmosphere, tangled wiring, and a hatch that opened inward. So NASA halts crewed flights, removes the hazards, cleans up cable runs, changes materials, adds a quick opening hatch, and only then resumes flights. The schedule slips, reliability rises. The first Saturn V flight, Apollo 4 in November 1967, flies without a crew and performs well. Apollo 6 in April 1968 exposes new problems: pogo oscillations, engine-driven vibrations that shake the stack, and an upper stage shutdown. Engineers add helium accumulators and plumbing changes to damp the pogo and fix the shutdown logic, then verify the fixes in further tests before putting people on top. With hardware maturing, NASA climbs the mission ladder in controlled steps. Apollo 7 tests the command and service module in Earth orbit after the post-fire redesign. The lunar module is behind schedule, and the Soviets may try a loop around the moon first, so NASA changes the plan. Apollo 8 will fly the command module to lunar orbit without a lander. That flight proves the stack: Saturn V, navigation, communications, and re-entry from lunar distance. In December 1968, Apollo 8 orbits the moon 10 times and returns safely. The architecture now works in space, not just on paper. Apollo 9 tests the lunar module in Earth orbit, undocking, independent flight, and rendezvous, so the docking choreography is proven. Apollo 10 runs the full dress rehearsal at the moon, descending to about 9 miles above the surface and then returning to orbit. Each success removes one unknown from the landing. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 lifts off from Pad 39A. 5 F-1s deliver about 7.5 million pounds of thrust and push uphill. Translunar injection, navigation, and checkout are nominal. The descent brings the final test. Computer alarms 1201 and 1202 say the guidance computer is overloaded but still managing the flight, so Neil Armstrong takes semi-manual control to avoid boulders and craters and stretches the fuel to land. Contact light, engine stop, the Eagle has landed. The system performs across launch, cruise, landing, ascent, rendezvous, and re-entry. For von Braun's team, the key line isn't the quote on the ladder, it's that the machine did its job. Why did Apollo work at this scale on this schedule? Engineers point to the same themes: tight interfaces between centers, relentless testing, documented changes, and a culture that rewards problems early. Von Braun shapes that culture in Huntsville and aligns it with NASA's systems leadership. Conservative choices, extra structural margin, redundant avionics, robust ground tests add weight and time, but they pay off when alarms sound and decisions must hold. The country celebrates, and von Braun enjoys his peak in public view. Parades, interviews, and magazine covers present him as the architect of the landing, an image that will matter for what comes next. Apollo's success doesn't erase earlier choices, it delays the argument about them. As lunar flights continue, questions from Europe begin to catch up with the hero in America. The dream has flown, the bill will be discussed in the open.
After Apollo 11, the United States settles on a simple story. We aimed at the moon and did it. And the headlines leave room to reopen the past. So while Apollo 12 and 13 move ahead, reporters and prosecutors in Europe return to Dora and Mittelwerk, the underground V2 factory complex in Germany's Harz Mountains that used forced labor. The transition from triumph to scrutiny happens almost immediately. In early 1969, just months after Neil Armstrong's first steps, a West German court summons Wernher von Braun to testify about the underground plant. The questions are direct: when he visited, what he saw, and what authority he held. He replied in writing that he went to fix production issues. The SS ran the camp. He did not control guards or labor. NASA keeps Apollo front and center in US coverage because if the wartime story expands now, the architect of Apollo headline turns into a debate over slavery and war. Public attention splits across continents. American television follows the continuing missions: Apollo 12's precision landing, Apollo 13's dramatic rescue. while European papers print longer pieces about the tunnels and the dead. Satire sharpens the discomfort. Tom Lehrer's Wernher von Braun reduces the split to one stinging couplet, and it spreads because a short song is easy to repeat. East German outlets push their own campaigns. Propaganda or not, the net effect in the West is similar. The heroic image now shows a seam. Why do survivor voices grow louder now? Because distance from the war makes speaking safer, and because courts finally ask. Former prisoners describe roll calls in freezing air, disease without medicine, hangings after sabotage, and engineers watching from catwalks. Some memories blur names and dates after decades. That is normal in trauma. But the core facts align. People died building the V2. The institutional response reveals the complexity of the moment. Museums and city councils want to celebrate a technological victory. Historians argue to show Peenemünde and Dora in the same frame. Because the Cold War still shapes pride and budgets, many exhibits keep the engineering on main panels and push the camps to side captions. You can see both choices in the same building. The rocket that reached the moon displayed prominently, with smaller text acknowledging the hands that built its predecessor. In the United States, federal investigators begin reviewing Paperclip-era responsibilities, a process that will erupt into headline cases in the mid-1980s. But for now, the focus remains on keeping Apollo's momentum alive while managing the growing questions about its architect's past. Archives open in steps, and reporters begin stitching one through line from Peenemünde to Dora to Paperclip to Apollo. School boards and councils hear from survivors and veterans. Some public names stay with added context and others come down. The argument is no longer whether Apollo happened. It's what it cost, who knew what, and who carries responsibility for the way it was pursued. What does von Braun say during these years? He calls the conditions he saw at Mittelwerk deplorable and frames his visits as technical, not managerial. He maintains that he was focused on solving rocket production problems, not running the camp. Survivor accounts describe harsher scenes on days when engineers toured the line. Increased brutality, forced demonstration of productivity, workers collapsing under the pressure to perform. The two versions do not merge into one clean record, and that tension becomes part of his legacy. By the late 1970s, as the Apollo program winds down, two tracks sit side by side in the public mind. One track is a proven method for managing complex programs, testing discipline, configuration control, and a launcher that did what it was designed to do. The other track is a wartime record tied to party membership, an SS commission, documented visits to an SS-run plant, and a decision to keep working within that system. The tension between these tracks doesn't resolve. It defines how we talk about him.
Wernher von Braun dies in 1977, age 65, after a short fight with cancer. He is buried in Virginia. His stone quotes Psalm 19:1, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Tributes follow because Apollo is still close in memory. Lectures established in his name, centers that display his rockets, magazine pieces that retell the moon story with undiminished wonder. But as the memorials settle into place, the past returns with more force. Survivors who worked in the tunnels at Mittelwerk, at Dora, Mittelbau Dora, begin to speak more openly. Journalists and historians gain access to previously classified records. With the Cold War easing and Apollo relegated to history, the pressure to maintain a single heroic narrative weakens, and the wartime chapters move from margins to main text. The first major shock inside the United States lands in 1984. Arthur Rudolph, V2 production manager in Germany, and later a Saturn V stage manager, faces an investigation by the Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations, OSI. The legal question isn't, did he build rockets that reached the moon? It's how were the earlier rockets built, and who bears responsibility for the system that built them?
The investigation reveals Rudolph's direct oversight of production at Mittelwerk, where prisoners worked in conditions that killed thousands. Rather than fight the charges, Rudolph leaves the country and renounces his U.S. citizenship. The message reverberates through NASA and beyond. If a celebrated Saturn V manager can fall over Dora, other Paperclip figures can face similar scrutiny. This case opens floodgates. Public symbols change unevenly across the country. Some schools and awards keep von Braun's name and add contextual plaques, others remove it after intense local debate. Museums begin revising labels to put Peenemünde, Dora, Marshall, and the Moon in the same frame. Not every vote goes the same way, but the direction is clear. The image gets fuller and much more complicated. At the same time, more of von Braun's own record enters public view. Documents confirm he joined the Nazi Party in 1937 to keep his post. He accepted an SS officer's commission in 1940. He made multiple documented visits to Mittelwerk during the war to solve production problems. Late in life, he had called the conditions there deplorable and described his role as purely technical, not managerial. But survivor accounts paint a different picture. They describe not just the deplorable conditions, but the presence of engineers during the worst moments. Roll calls in freezing air where prisoners collapsed, punishments administered after suspected sabotage, hangings carried out in full view of the production line. Some recall engineers watching from catwalks as prisoners were beaten for working too slowly. Others remember increased brutality when important visitors toured the facilities. The testimonies don't align perfectly. Trauma and decades blur details, but they consistently place technical personnel, including von Braun, as witnesses to systematic brutality. The record doesn't reconcile into a single clean narrative, and that gap between von Braun's account and survivor memories becomes a permanent part of his legacy. Textbooks, universities, and documentaries begin adjusting their tone. Many keep the engineering praise, but place it beside frank discussion of human cost. Classroom units that once ended triumphantly with the moon landing now add sections on Dora, Paperclip, and engineering ethics. The honors don't vanish entirely, but the footnotes expand into full paragraphs, then into chapters. By the late 1980s, a new consensus emerges, not agreement, but acceptance of complexity. Two facts have to live together in any honest account: a management culture that delivered Saturn V and achieved the lunar landing, and a wartime record that includes party membership, an SS officer's commission, documented visits to an SS-run factory where thousands died, and a decision to continue working within that system even after seeing its human cost. The tension doesn't resolve because it can't. It frames how we talk about technological achievement, moral compromise, and the price of progress. It becomes the central question of his legacy. Can great engineering achievements be separated from the systems that enabled them?
The moon footage endures. The records from Dora endure. Neither erases the other. The path from Kummersdorf to Tranquility Base is fully documented, and both the destination and the cost are preserved on film and in testimony. Von Braun's teams proved how to build and fly very large rockets on schedule, and that capability reshaped daily life in ways we now take for granted. Satellites track hurricanes over warm water, so warnings reach coastal communities with time to evacuate while roads remain open. Space-based timing systems keep the same precise second flowing through cellular networks, financial systems, power grids, and transportation networks, so complex infrastructure stays synchronized across continents. The same satellites guide aircraft on fuel-efficient routes and help emergency responders, ambulances, wildfire crews, search and rescue teams reach exact locations even in the worst conditions. Heavy lift capability widened humanity's eyes on Earth. Imaging constellations map floods, drought, and wildfire smoke in near real time, so aid reaches the communities that need it most, and farmers can plan irrigation before crops fail. When undersea cables fail during storms or earthquakes, communication satellites carry everything from remote medical consultations to classroom lessons across oceans,
keeping isolated communities connected to the wider world. The management methods that held Saturn V together, safety margins built into critical structures, redundant backups for essential systems, and ground tests that intentionally broke components to find weaknesses, also enabled the telescopes and planetary probes that expanded human knowledge. Hubble, Voyager, and Mars rovers ride on the same operational habits. Design conservatively, test rigorously, expect failures during development, and fix problems before lives depend on the system. These practices didn't emerge by accident. At Marshall Space Flight Center, von Braun demanded technical drawings that matched actual hardware, required all design changes to be documented and reviewed, and insisted on stage-by-stage testing before a complete rocket stack ignited with crew aboard. That discipline helped ensure that Saturn V worked correctly on its first crewed mission, a remarkable achievement in aerospace history. Many subsequent programs, from the Space Shuttle to modern commercial rockets, inherited and refined these same methodologies because they demonstrably worked. His wartime record sits inseparably beside that engineering achievement. He joined the Nazi Party in 1937 to retain his position, accepted an SS officer's commission in 1940, and made documented visits to Mittelwerk during the war to resolve V-2 production problems. The underground factory used captive labor, prisoners of war, political detainees, and concentration camp inmates who worked in horrific conditions. Thousands died building the weapon that von Braun had designed. These facts are part of the same career, the same man, the same story. They are not in dispute among serious historians, though their interpretation and moral weight remain subjects of intense debate. Public memory moves slower than technology and unevenly across institutions. Some museums and memorials still display moon rockets without meaningful context about the tunnels where their predecessors were built. Others focus on the wartime horrors without acknowledging the genuine achievements that followed. A fuller accounting requires both perspectives in the same frame: the extraordinary scale of technological achievement and the human cost that preceded and enabled it. The most honest assessment acknowledges both the reach of what von Braun built and the moral compromises that shaped his path to those achievements. After his death, the machines continued flying, and the historical documents continued speaking. His legacy encompasses both the satellites that track storms and guide rescuers, and the prisoners who died in darkness building rockets that never flew. Two facts remain about the man at the center of this story. He led the teams that gave the United States the heavy lift capability that carried human beings to the moon and back safely. He also pursued that work after choosing to serve a regime that used captive labor to build its weapons, and he continued that service even after witnessing the conditions under which prisoners worked and died. The rockets still launch. The testimonies still speak. Both are part of the same story: the dream of space and what one man was willing to sacrifice to achieve it.